tell you what I know and why it matters to you.
Back live with Peter Credlin.
Welcome back. A crossbench member of the British House of Lords, Baroness Cox, is also the CEO of an organisation called Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust. Baroness Cox has introduced a private member's bill to protect Muslim women living in Britain from Sharia law decisions. Baroness Cox is in Australia for a speaking tour and she joins me tonight from our Melbourne studio. Baroness Cox, thank you very much for your time and welcome to Australia.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm delighted that you're here. I know you're here to do work in relation to your charitable efforts with HEART, Humanitarian Aid Relief Trust. But you've also been a very big advocate on the issue of Sharia law in Britain. Last week on my show, we talked about a recent, quite historic decision of British courts to apply Sharia law to their judgment related to divorce proceedings, and a woman who wanted property settlement who argued that her Sharia law marriage constituted British marriage for the purposes of divorce settlements, and the court upheld that. So for the first time, we've seen now an application of Sharia law in a senior British court. Now, clearly, allowing one faith to trump common law, statutory law, is a very, very big move. We all looked to the British law at one time, and certainly it was part of the foundation of Australian law. This is very significant.
It's very significant indeed. First, may I say, I believe in freedom of religion and belief, and there are aspects of Sharia law which you can't argue with. For example, fasting. Christians fast in Lent, praying 5 times a day. But the bottom line must be that in a country such as the United Kingdom, we should not allow rulings which are incompatible with the fundamental laws, values, principles and policies of our nation. And there are issues in Sharia law which I've been raising in Parliament for a long time now, particularly how Muslim women suffer from the asymmetrical divorce. The man just says, I divorce you 3 times. The woman has no reciprocal right. If she wants to go to a Sharia court or council, she may have to pay. She won't have the money. There's polygamy. We don't allow bigamy, but in Sharia law, polygamy is very widespread indeed. And then there is the justification in certain cases of so-called honour-based violence. Muslim women come to see me. I weep with them, with their suffering. And I would say the suffragettes would be turning in their graves if they knew what's happening to many Muslim women in Britain today with the application of Sharia law.
Well, we wouldn't allow that sort of faith-based law to take away the rights of women if they were Catholic, if they were Jewish, if they are part of any other religion. So why are we so open-minded when it comes to Sharia law, particularly in the last couple of decades? And with this decision, I've seen it applauded by feminists because it enabled the woman who used Sharia law to petition for divorce proceedings and the settlement to go in her favour. They argue that emancipated the woman, but in fact that's just one argument. I can find plenty of women who are not emancipated under Sharia law, with child brides and many of the other circumstances you've talked about, with asymmetric divorce and other things. So isn't this, in a country like Britain, turning back the rights of women in a major way under law protection, under the protection of the courts?
Absolutely right. It's a concern I passionately share with you. There are 2 aspects I'd just like to raise. One is the fundamental threat to that principle of democracy of one law for all. In a country which signed Magna Carta over 800 years ago, there's a real risk we may be allowing a parallel legal system to take place, which I and many other people believe would be deeply, deeply disturbing. But secondly, there are the aspects, as I've said, of the rulings of Sharia law, which are gender discriminatory. And in Britain, we're meant to be promoting gender equality. So I try to shine the light through the 2 prisms of the Sharia law, which is inherently discriminatory, causing Muslim women to become suicidal, some of the ones who come to see me, and that threat to one law for all. And I have a private members bill trying to help that situation. It has the support for the Muslim Council of Muslim Women's Council in Britain, other Muslim women, and it would make it a legal requirement that every Islamic marriage or every religious marriage must be legally registered. And then that would give women the protection of a legally registered marriage, which at the moment many do not have.
So just unpack that for me a little bit. So you have this private members bill that you've put into the Parliament. What's the process for your private members bill? Most of my viewers would understand how it works in Australia. How will it work in Britain? Will there be a vote on your bill? How do you get it through the Parliament?
Well, the most important thing is it raises awareness. I've had several private members' bills dealing with these issues. Increasingly, there's more and more support from all parts of the House of Lords and different parties in the House of Commons supporting the concerns which we're raising now about the asymmetrical divorce, about the polygamy, about the so-called honour-based violence, has a lot of cross-party support. The main first stage is you get what's called the second reading, the main debate on the bill when the issues are raised. Last time I had 19 members of the House of Lords supporting my private members' bill from all parties. And that is very important because it puts pressure on the government. It calls the government to account to do something. And so it may not become law, but it's a way of moving the process forward to try to get the government to take these issues seriously and, above all, to take the measures which are needed, A, to protect the Muslim women who are suffering, and B, to protect our spiritual, cultural and political heritage, which is very much under threat if we don't draw the line at this place.
Well, we're having a similar debate in Australia about protecting the values of Western civilisation, honouring them, not walking away from them, not being embarrassed to argue for them and support their retention. We often hear about Sharia courts in Britain operating at a lower level. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that all works?
Well, we know there are over 85 Sharia courts or councils that we know about. There are probably many others that are operational that are not so much in the public awareness. I visited one of them and it was extremely like a court. There was a platform with 3 chairs. There was a sheikh sitting on one chair. The imam who took me in sat on the next chair. Below them, there was a lady completely covered in a burqa, her back to me. When I went in, the sheikh who was conducting the trial gave us a 10-minute monologue over this women and said to me at the end, do you have any questions? And I said, well, thank you. I think we've taken up enough of this woman's very valuable, precious time, too long already. We'll take questions outside. He then came and shook hands with my male colleague, that's fair enough, gave me a chance to shake hands with the lady. And I could just see her eyes, and I just said, I do hope you find some happiness and the yearning in her eyes. But that was a court setup, and that is, I think, very disturbing in a country like Britain.
And are they sanctioned by any local jurisdictions, or do they operate outside the law? What's their sort of legal basis?
Well, they operate on their own terms in the concept of Sharia law. And as I say, it is very worrying because I wish you could just meet some of the women who came to see me. Just a few weeks ago, a lady came to see me who was suicidal. She was desperate. She'd been divorced by her husband. She tried to go to the imam to get some help because once you're divorced, you have no rights unless you've got a legally registered marriage. She was destitute. She was desperate. The imam, so she said, actually denied the marriage had taken place and said she was de facto, if she had been married, divorced. Her husband was bad-mouthing her, saying she was broken glass, and she said she has no future. She's got no rights, she's destitute, she's desperate, and she's bad-mouthed, so she won't get another good marriage, either in the UK or in the country which she came from, which was Pakistan. And she's got nothing to live for. She was suicidal. And I could multiply that case many times over. Shouldn't be happening in Britain today.
Well, it shouldn't be happening here in Australia either, Baroness Cox, but I have to say we've had some recent horrific cases. We've had an increase in child marriage in New South Wales. There was a particularly violent case in Victoria where a woman was beaten. Indeed, her husband, the perpetrator, ripped her eyeball out while she was alive, and she was, in the end, murdered, and all because he had taken a second wife and she wasn't towing the line, and the transcript from the court hearings was abominable. You mentioned burqas before. I'd like to just ask you the question here. We've watched very much what's been happening in Europe in relation to bans on full-face veiling, and obviously the most recent decision pertained to Denmark. I've also read the comments by the former Foreign Minister Boris Johnson recently. Now, he's sort of, unfortunately for poor Boris, upset both camps here by saying that he has no time for burqas. The left are upset by saying that they should not be banned. The right is upset. Do you think there is a place for the banning of the burqa in Britain?
I think it needs very serious discussion indeed. There are complications and issues which must be addressed. For example, it's very hard for someone with a burqa fully to relate to somebody or to relate to her. it may prevent integration, and it may also be a genuine security risk. So there are issues that need proper, serious discussion. I mean, it's unfortunate that Boris used a slightly provocative phrase which deflected attention from the very serious issue, and I think it's something that must come before Parliament soon.
I just want to ask you about this, the way in which you can conduct a debate on this issue. And I was seeing with Boris, he used the reference of letterbox or pillar box, which is the equivalent in Australia. Yes, it was a provocative phrase, of course it was, but the issue must be out there in the public domain. I couldn't agree more, and it needs to come from sensible people to have a sensible discussion, because when it's run at the fringes, it's easy for the left to shut down what is a genuine concern, I would say, right across Middle Australia and I'd hazard to say across Britain in ordinary suburbs, in ordinary homes. So the problem with the word Islam in any conversation about politics is if you are not wholly supportive, if you want to ask tough questions, if you want to query Sharia law, all of these issues we've talked about tonight, you're shouted down as Islamophobic. Now, that takes away reason from the debate, takes away fact, and it also makes it very hard to defend the culture that we have, that so many Australians want to see protected and supported into the future. How do we tackle this whole issue of Islamophobia, which is just a device from the left to shut down debate?
I couldn't agree more. To me, it must be discussed. The way in which I've tried to address it are twofold. One is genuine concern for people who are suffering under Sharia law. There was an article in one of our national newspapers with headlines saying, they'd love to call me Islamophobic, but I love Muslim women. So we have to make perhaps a distinction between Muslims, between Islam and between Islamism or political Islam that's trying to use the freedoms of democracy to destroy the democracy and the freedoms which it enshrines. So that's point number one. We must make those distinctions. And secondly, we must look at those rulings and those developments in our society which are incompatible with the fundamental laws, values, principles, policies of our nation. And that's where we have to say this is unacceptable. And I think you cannot be called Islamophobic if you are known to respect people, respect those aspects of Sharia law which are not incompatible, but take very, very seriously those issues which are a real threat to our political heritage and our freedoms.
Baroness Cox, thank you very much for your time. It's a topic I could talk about all night, but you've got a very reasoned way through some of these difficult issues that so many senior political leaders in Australia are just too scared to talk about. So all credit to you, and our hearts go out to your colleagues in the Commons and in the Lords at the moment with this attack in London. We're not sure the exact nature of it. It's still coming out, but our thoughts are with you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been a privilege to be with you and to share the pain and the passion and the concerns.
Thank you very much, Baroness Cox. And just a quick update on the situation in Westminster, London. Metropolitan Police have confirmed the Counter-Terrorism Command is leading the investigation into a car crash outside the UK Parliament. A man has been arrested after he crashed into his vehicle into safety barriers, injuring a number of people. We will continue to bring you new information as it comes to us. Coming up after the break, my panel.
You're watching Credlin on Australia's News Channel.
This is Australia at Work. Business generates